There are no typical days. They are all atypical, and I suppose they're typical in that way. I do, personally, many different things. Contacting other civilizations, creating art, many different things. Different beings go about doing different things that excite them and come together when they need to, in perfect synchronicity, when they need to come together, without planning. As we said, it is very quiet because it is mostly telepathic. There are sounds in the forests of animals and such. They are similar to some degree to yours, but not exactly. All our animals are symbiotic. There is no predation. Do you understand?
What is predation?
Predators.
Oh, okay.
There are no predators. There are only symbiotes on our planet. Nothing in that sense feeds off another to the point of death. You follow?
Yeah.
All right. We go about doing many different things. There are trainings for those that come into the idea of being first contact specialists like myself. There are field trips to other worlds. There are journeys on spaceships. There are communions with nature in a variety of ways. Gatherings of beings of all types in a variety of ways. Inventing of things and creation of things and games in a variety of ways. There are many things.
Are there, like here, there's class systems. Some there's poor people, there's rich people, there's
No,
middle class.
we don't have that.
And so people can just really do what they want to do.
Yes, the entire civilization is completely run and organized by synchronicity. People are where they need to be, when they need to be there, with whom they need to be, to learn what they need to learn, to get what they need to get. It works automatically because we all operate that way. You ride the wave. So our civilization, we all ride the wave. It's that simple.
And does that mean, too, so if you live about 300 years, if someone passes away, are you not as devastated as we are in humans because you know you're riding the wave and everything is different?
Well, yes, and we're also not devastated because we don't lose contact with them. They've just shifted into another state that we can still communicate with.
Okay, awesome.
And so can you.
Essassani are ascended compared to us and don't make mistakes or get impatient. Is that true? And can you explain this difference and why the Pleiadians would send such a message?
That is a misinterpretation to some degree. Yes, Pleiadians can make mistakes in the sense that you understand that term, but they don't relate to them as mistakes. They relate to them in the way that we do, as simply new information that can be applied in given situations. They don't have the idea of unrequited love. They do not experience that in that way. Can they be sad? Yes, they can be. But they don't really experience things in the way that that person is describing. That's a little bit of filtering coming through the human persona. But the idea is they are certainly of a higher vibration than many people on your planet. If you want to say they are ascended because they are on a higher frequency, then certainly you can say that. But they are more similar to you than we are. They are, again, your genetic cousins. They are very much like you in many ways, but they are the fourth density version, and therefore are more like what humanity is evolving into as physical beings in a fourth density state. So, no, it's not as pronounced as the way that was described in terms of what they experience emotionally, but they are a little bit more like you. They can experience a little bit more of a range of emotions in that sense. Something that you can relate to more easily. Yet they are still seemingly, from your perspective, more advanced in their emotional qualities.
The idea of the YahYel, or in our ancient language, the Shalanaya, which simply means the first ones, will be that they were created last of the 5 hybrid races. And in being created last, in being, in a sense, the newest version to be created, they are more similar to your human beings than we are, and much more similar to your human beings than the first hybrid race is. So in that sense, that is why they will be the first ones you will meet, so as to buffer your experience of extraterrestrial contact with a civilization that has a lot of similarity to you. So it will not be too alien for you to assimilate the idea of interacting with them. In time, you will meet the other hybrid races. We, again, in the balanced position, in the center point, being the third hybrid race created, will be the third race that you will encounter of the hybrids.
Arcturians are not a physical species in the way you understand that. They're higher dimensional forms of consciousness. They are participating in the transformation of your world in a very specific way. They create what we have termed loosely as the Arcturus gate. The Arcturus gate is a particular vibrational frequency that is taken on by many of the new beings being born on your planet for the past few decades. That frequency allows them to maintain a stronger connection to their indestructible core, and they don't forget as much of who they are in coming into the physical incarnation on your planet. They have, because of that frequency connection to the Arcturus gate, more of a strong guidance system that even should there be a lot of things that could distract them from side to side in terms of the belief systems of Earth, they don't go quite as far with that. They maintain a more even keel going through their lives because they do not forget as much of who they are.
Where did the praying mantis originate?
Their progenitors, which are not what they are, but that which gave them form, emerged from what you would recognize as, in your language, the black hole at the center of your galaxy. From where before that, in space and time, there is not language to translate, but of a dimension you do not understand except in your deepest, darkest dreams, not meaning that in a negative way. There is a substance of consciousness and intention in that reality that is the knife edge of intention itself, the precision of focus beyond what you can imagine in human terms, a single-mindedness of existence beyond anything that your multi-dimensional, multi-purpose, multi-expressive human consciousness would ever deem to be something that could exist and still allow there to be intelligence behind it. Yet it is a burning intelligence, a burning focus of consciousness, a dimension unto itself that gave birth to several kinds of forms, one form of which, emerging through these gateways you call black holes, formed the progenitors for what you now know as the founders, which are different than the progenitors, but based on silicon as a life form.
The idea is that there was a naturally evolved hominid being that existed on your planet as part of its natural evolution, and genetically it was altered by an extraterrestrial race to become what you now understand yourself to be as Homo sapien.
Can you tell me what that extraterrestrial race was?
Well, you refer to them as the Anunnaki. But the idea is that the way things happened back then was ultimately found out by the majority of the Anunnaki, and the Anunnaki contingent that was on your planet who was doing those genetic alterations was recalled because it was understood that much of what they were doing was not within the integrity of the Anunnaki people. And so you were left to your own devices with some guidance now and then, in a sense to attempt to course correct the idea of what that contingent has done and allow you to grow and evolve as a species in balance. Of course, it's been what you would call a little bit of a rocky road. Nevertheless, you are now allowing some of the genetic markers that were shut off within you to open up, because remember, you all contain Anunnaki genes. And now you're beginning to open those markers for a variety of reasons, and now beginning to reclaim more of your true birthright and functioning more like the Anunnaki.
Are there any Anunnaki either here physically on Earth or communicating telepathically with anyone here?
Not in their original form contemporarily, unless you are referring to the Greys as the devolved result of a certain branch of Anunnaki. A faction of the Anunnaki set up shop, if you will, on a planet, and ultimately
created catastrophes in their world that ultimately resulted in the devolution of themselves into the form you now understand as the Grey.
Right, I actually knew that. Okay.
So in that sense, they are still, to some degree, Anunnaki, though they now require the idea of the genetic material that they utilize to create the human body to begin with to reinforce their own race and create the hybrid species so that they can incarnationally continue. So in that sense, I suppose if you want to simply talk about it incarnationally, you and we together are also offshoots of Anunnaki.
Yes, exactly.
At least to some degree genetically.
Are there any ones from what we would perceive from our past that are here now that have,
from
say,
time
jumped?
to time, they do peer in, yes. From time to time, they have participated in certain things, yes. It is not that common. From time to time, this has been done, yes. It is not that common.
Okay. And when
some of what individuals have called the large Nordics are to some degree representative of some of the ancient Anunnakis.
The story of my people began in a parallel reality on an alternate version of Earth. The humans on that Earth were technologically far in advance of the humans in your civilization. However, they became focused on technology and intellect. Over generations, they lost connection to their humanity. They lost the ability to feel. They even lost the ability to reproduce. They engineered love out of their lives. They accomplished great technological and intellectual feats at the expense of their emotions, their physical bodies, and their spiritual qualities, which they considered to be inferior. But in doing so, they slowly destroyed their environment. In a last desperate attempt to perpetuate their species, they moved underground and began to clone themselves, but discovered that their DNA was no longer viable. When the attempt to clone themselves failed, they genetically mutated themselves into the beings you know as the Greys in an attempt to adapt to their dying planet. However, they realized that the only solution would be to find a viable source of human DNA and introduce it back into their genetic makeup. They used their advanced technology to shift into parallel realities, such as your own, where they knew that humans must still exist. But without emotions, they had no understanding of the fearful impact they would have as they abducted your people and extracted DNA in order to create our hybrid civilizations, which took centuries to complete. We were designed to bring emotionality and spirituality, vitality and balance back into the Grey civilization, to reconnect more fully with creation so their culture would never die out.
Okay, and could you clarify the differences between the Greys that you're referring to and the Zeta Reticuli?
As we have mentioned from time to time, there are many factions of Greys. And the reason for this primarily is that when we talked about the idea of Greys coming from a parallel version of Earth and other parallel realities, you must understand that there are a multitude of Greys from different parallel realities that come through to different versions of Earth. So you have a mix of Greys, in a sense, that come from different origin points, all interacting to some degree in what you consider to be your reality. So the Greys that are connected to Zeta Reticuli are not exactly the same Greys that are involved primarily in our creation, in the idea of the hybridization agenda. So it gets a little bit confusing because some can cross over from one agenda to another from time to time. But there are many factions of Greys that come from many different parallel realities, all coexisting simultaneously in what you consider to be your timeline.
In your exploration of the universe, when you come across negative ETs,
How do you deal with them?
We mostly leave them alone. Because again, we can observe, but they do not match our frequency. So there's no effect upon us to witness them, to observe them. But the idea is that we recognize they may be at a certain stage in their journey, in their evolution. And most of the ones in that sense that truly are expressing negativity in that way, the way you're asking it, aren't really out here among the stars. They're usually relatively either planet-bound or solar system-bound. They don't usually reach too much farther. This is kind of one of the reasons for the intelligence of the space between the stars. It's almost the same kind of idea that you do when you quarantine people so that the disease cannot spread. So the fact that the stars to you are so far apart, unless you finally understand exactly how to span that gulf in an efficient way as we have and other civilizations have, you usually remain relatively bound to your own solar system and cannot spread the negative infection, so to speak. So the idea of your science fiction, where the negative beings can create a negative empire and go around and conquer a bunch of planets, usually can only happen within a very small amount of space, relatively speaking. They can reach other planets perhaps and do things like that, but it's a relatively limited experience within the universe that we have found, because they just can't get much farther.
Now, this story of the Orion systems took a long time to work itself through. There were resistances, what you would call underground movements, in the Orion systems, fighting against the suppression, fighting against the oppression, fighting against the negativity. The translation of those resistance fighters in your language would be the Black League. The Black League took their name as the idea of being invisible, being in the dark, being hidden, being surreptitious, so they could fight the fight they believed they had to fight against the oppressive governments of the ancient Orion systems. However, one of the very great lessons they learned in that time was the idea that if you fight fire with fire, you just get more fire. And the idea of using the same violent tactics against the government that the government was using against them did not really work out very well for that resistance movement, and it created an increase in the suppression and an increase in the negativity, and thus they learned that there must be another way. And in learning that there must be another way, they began to approach the idea of the negativity with positive energy, positive vibrations, and over time slowly transform the Orion systems from darkness into light, from negative into positive,